All right, thank you very much. I hope that was enough time for you to discuss with your neighbor some of, well, what Professor Wright said, what you found most interesting, most disturbing, most humorous. I personally liked the reference to Star Wars. Yes? Okay. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Cynthia Schaefer-Elliott, and I am the professor of Old Testament here at William Jessup. I teach Old Testament and I teach archaeology, and it was my privilege to help bring N.T. Wright here and organize this event, but it wouldn't have been possible without the support and the connection of Peter Rogers and the Center for Bible Studies. So please, everyone, give him a round of applause. So you have been emailing and texting your questions, and we're going to take some time to go through some of those. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we will try our hardest to get through a good chunk of them. And again, this is being recorded as well, so we will have this available at some point. And also, as the university likes to put on different lectures like this, I hope you will keep an eye on the future for different lectures that we bring to you, and hopefully we can persuade Professor Wright to come again. Would you like that? All right. So let's start off with this question. This question asks, how do we begin to change the narrative of power within the life of the local church? That's not an easy one to start off with.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I think there are many people, not least people younger than myself, who are fed up with the way that people in the church play power games and have played power games. And there are many people who have stopped going to church and will give us one of the answers that it's just dominated by these older guys, probably people my age actually, and it just doesn't seem to have anything for them. A good start would be to read Mark 10 rather carefully, because there Jesus talks about the way that the rulers of the world organize things, that they bully and they boss people about, and Jesus says, that's one way of doing power, we're going to do it the other way. Anyone who wants to be great must be your servant. Anyone who wants to be first must be a slave of all. And practical ways of doing that are to find people in the community who appear to be powerless, and to find out what they might be good at, and to encourage and enable them to set up some sort of structures within which as many people as possible within the church can have a share in doing things which they are good at, things which God may be calling them to do. And I was privileged when I was Bishop of Durham in England to see some churches that were really quite good at that, and where, though the leadership is still the leadership, because it doesn't mean you don't need leaders, it doesn't mean you have an anarchy, power is just done differently by being shared. And of course, the other great place to go is 2 Corinthians, where Paul redefines power in terms of weakness. And he does that precisely because of the cross. And he models it. And if you read carefully through 2 Corinthians with this question in mind, again and again, Paul's answers will be almost too explosive for you. They're very challenging for anyone at any stage of life in the church. I suspect this is a perennial problem. I don't think it's just our generation. I think it's always one we're likely to face. And it's always a lesson that has to be learned, because learning the lesson of the cross remains difficult. The cross goes right. It isn't just, yes, I know Jesus died for my sins, now let's think about something else. No, that's basic, yes, but the cross goes right down through the whole system. And living with it in ethics, in power, in community life remains a challenge, and probably is bound to be so. And that's why we do liturgy the way we do. That's why some of us make the sign of the cross. That's why the Eucharist is what it is. That's why baptism is what it is. It's cross-shaped, cross-focused, and has to be lived that way. I know this is a tough call, but we have to go on trying.
All right, our next question. I'm an evangelical who has worked with the mainline church this past year. I've seen great Christian love demonstrated by people who do not believe in a literal resurrection. How and why should I convince them it is real?
That's good. My late lamented friend Marcus Borg, who some of you will know or know of, he just died this last New Year. He and I worked together, we wrote a book together, we went on the road together. And Marcus used to say when we were doing public debates, I believe Jesus was raised from the dead, I just don't believe it had anything to do with his body, which is kind of a slippery way through. But as I got to know Marcus, I realized why he felt he had to take that line, and others in that camp, why they felt they had to take that line. Because they had grown up in a church which taught that the resurrection was a kind of special, odd miracle that God did for Jesus because he was his son, or something like that, or that it just showed how powerful God was. And they were thinking, well, if God's that powerful, why didn't he step in and stop the Holocaust? Why didn't he prevent some great evils in the world from happening? Why should he happen to do this as a special favor for his own son? And of course, if that's how you'd seen the bodily resurrection, then you might well come up with arguments like that. And the problem is that the church has not preached the bodily resurrection as the launching of new creation. Death has been dealt with through the cross, and now new creation begins. Instead, the church has seen the resurrection simply as a sign that there is life after death, which then validates our kind of pie-in-the-sky dreams. And again, people like Marcus Borg and others like him would see that that produces a Christian or Christian church that is careless about what's actually going on in the real world. That is tragic, because actually the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, is the launching of God's putting right project for the world. So it's a matter of continually going back and saying, actually, this is what the sources themselves say. And of course, believing in the bodily resurrection of Jesus remains at one level totally absurd. But you have to get this straight. And it's because people have not thought round this loop, especially in modern Western culture, my country, and I think particularly yours, that it becomes very difficult for them. That the resurrection of Jesus is not an odd, bizarre event within the old world, though it is that in a sense. It is the paradigmatic and definitive event within the new world. And we have to say, we Christians believe that God has launched his new creation, and that this is not a strange thing, it is the beginning of how it always is. And then, actually, I know some people who used to take the liberal view of no bodily resurrection and have changed their minds, and often it's because of real differences that they have seen the gospel making in their own lives or in the lives of people they know and love. Sometimes actual physical healing, sometimes emotional healing, and they realize, oh my goodness, maybe God is a God of new creation after all. And it's when you see new creation at work in the community and in people's lives that it's a whole lot easier to believe in real resurrection. Sorry, complicated question, but so complicated answer.
In the midst of a church culture that often functions like Cicero's academic worldview, it seems we need a theological backbone and need to study, albeit we all can't study at St. Andrews, but we would love to. But how do we reconcile that with the need for intentional love and breaking down of dividing walls? Time, dysfunctional worldview, and ignorance seem hindrances that are overbearing.
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty is that, again, we modern Westerns, and especially, if I may say so, in an audience like this, a self-selected group of people coming to a university, to a public lecture, this bound to be people who are interested in thinking through ideas. Once we realize the scale of the problem, we think, oh my goodness, this is more than I could learn about in 5 years or 50 years. It's huge, let alone could do anything about. And this is where the doctrine of the body of Christ really matters. It is not my job to think through all aspects of the Christian worldview. It's not my job, though I wish it was, to do the kind of archaeology that you do, because it sounds enormous fun. It's not my job to go at the moment, who knows, God might call me to go and dig wells in Africa, but it's somebody's job. And in the body of Christ, we need to support and sustain and encourage radically different visions. And I often say to people, young people, when they say, oh my goodness, there's so much going on, where should I start? I say, well, live with those problems, say your prayers, talk to your friends and your pastor about who you are and who God seems to be gifting you to become. And it may become clear, not necessarily overnight or obviously, that actually you should be doing this bit of the job and trusting that God is calling other people to do their bits. That isn't a whole answer, but I think we individualists often think once we've seen the problem, we want to be able to basically solve the problem this weekend and then implement that solution next weekend, and then, phew, we can all then sit back and it'll be done. It ain't like that. It's never going to be like that. We depend on one another.
Well, I think this next question dovetails off of that one a bit. This is an ecumenical event. What other ways to promote agreement on the differences that make difference across faiths?
Yeah, by faiths I assume the questioner means different Christian denominations rather than different faiths as in Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, etc. I think it probably means that across different churches. A defining moment for me was 7 years ago when I was the Anglican observer at the Roman Catholic Synod of Bishops in Rome, which is a wonderful way to spend 3 weeks in October, by the way, just going and living in Rome. My wife and I had a ball. It was terrific. Fancy going to a symphony concert in the church where St. Paul is supposedly buried, with the Pope sitting in the middle and the cardinals all around and the Vienna Philharmonic. And it was a wonderful. Anyway, that wasn't the point. Although cultural events do help. That's quite a serious point. They do. But the defining moment for me was when I heard Roman Catholic bishops saying that there are two basic ecumenical instruments, baptism and the Bible. We share baptism. Now that may be difficult to put in practice, but in principle, the churches are signed up to saying when somebody's been baptized in the name of the Trinity, even if they then change allegiance to a different denomination, you don't rebaptize them. Now I know that there are questions about who gets baptized, is it infants, is it adults, etc. That's a problem. It shouldn't be an ultimately insuperable problem. But the Bible is an ecumenical instrument because we all share the Bible. And okay, some people's Bibles have one or two more books in that others don't. But let's not, don't get hung up on the side issues. We all have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc. We all have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. Let's just read this stuff together. Let's organize little ecumenical groups on our street, in our neighborhood. Let's phone up the local representatives of 2 or 3 other churches and say, why don't we next Lent try and read Colossians together? Or why don't we have a program for getting our heads around Luke next Lent and getting the kids to do some plays about different bits of it and getting people to do artwork around it, and maybe if there's some musicians to get them to do some stuff. And let's get some cultural cross-fertilization going on around Scripture. And the thing about that is it's wonderfully open-ended. This shouldn't start with one person thinking, well, because I'm a Bible teacher, I'm going to show those people that we know what. No, this has to be, we come with open books and open hands, not empty-headedly. G.K. Chesterton said the purpose of an open mind is like the purpose of an open mouth, that you should shut it again on something solid. So that's fine. When you're reading the Bible together, though, there is an openness, because people in other traditions will read passages very differently. And you might say, wow, I need to go away and think about that. I've never seen it like that. And then maybe they will hear you saying your bit as well. Shared scripture study is central. It's not just a luxury for those who happen to like that sort of thing. It's actually, I think, the way forward. And out of that there can grow a sense quite quickly of shared discussion about ethical issues. Oh, we hear that your church does such and such, or we thought we saw in the press that one of your bishops or archbishops said this and that and the other. Actually, let's get to grips with that, but do it within the friendship that shared Bible study can create. I could go on, but I think the point is made.
Well, I didn't think I would ever say this, but I think we have a question that I'm not sure you can answer.
quite possibly.
What what would Paul's thoughts have been about Bob Dylan?
That's very easy. He would have just said, "Play it again, man." That's great. We could discuss that at some length. Actually, the part of the serious point about that is that when I was student age in the 60s, Dylan was a prophet. I mean a prophet. People hung on his words. People interpreted his poetry to try to figure out what was going on in the dangerous world we live in. Who is doing that right now? Bono? Yes and no? We've somehow lost the art of listening to new voices in the culture at the mass level that are telling us the uncomfortable things about what's going on. And that's a dangerous place to be.
What do you think the response of the contemporary Pauline community should be to the horrific persecution of Christians that we are seeing around the world today?
Yeah. I had an email just maybe 2-3 weeks ago from a dear friend who is the Anglican bishop in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, in that area. And there were yet again another group of Christians that were rounded up by Islamic militants and were brutally executed simply for being Christians. And that's obviously not the first time it's happened in recent weeks. This stuff is going on as we speak. What would Paul say? I think the first thing that Paul would say is, yes, this is incredibly horrible, but it is precisely what we were told would happen. Jesus said, if anyone wants to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up the cross. And in his world, that wasn't a metaphor. However, it's incredibly difficult for me to say that, sitting in a comfortable university chair in Scotland. It's incredibly difficult for you to say that, sitting in California, because we are insulated and isolated from it. And we are not at the moment. That's why I made that quip at the beginning about everywhere St. Paul went, there were riots. What have we done with the gospel that there aren't riots? Now, in a sense, it's because the West has been so deeply affected by Christian faith that people expect us to say and do certain things. However, we have accommodated so easily. We have colluded so easily that maybe we have become too culturally conformist, too comfortable, including radical evangelicals, etc. We are still culturally conditioned. In ways, so I think Paul would say, first, this is something to be expected. Second, if it's not happening, you should ask yourself questions. Not that we seek persecution. We don't have a martyr complex. We're not paranoid. We don't want to throw ourselves under persecution. And if we do have a breathing space, let's use it to pray, to study, to work. It won't do simply to go to the United Nations and say, those nasty radical Islamists are beating up our friends in North Africa or whatever. Maybe something could and should be done, but there is so much more that we need to do to understand how we've got where we've got through the compromises of the 19th and 20th centuries, so that this stuff has taken us unawares. Actually, persecution of Christians has been going on throughout history. It just happens to be pretty widespread at the moment. So we need to try to understand it, but at the heart it has to be prayer. We are part of the same family. These are our brothers and sisters, our uncles and aunts, our nieces and nephews who are being cut to pieces. It is desperate. So I think, yes, it's to be expected. Why isn't it happening everywhere? Maybe it's because God is giving us a breathing space, or maybe it's because we've compromised, or a bit of both. And then let that drive us to prayer. And if that prayer drives us to particular ways of speaking the truth to the power brokers of the world who might be able to do something about it, then maybe a new word needs to be heard.
Next question. How do we embark on a biblical quest for social justice and human rights without falling in the line of being, quote, just another special interest group of activists, end quote?
It seems to me that there's always plenty of room for special groups of groups of special interest activists, or whatever that phrase was, because God calls us differently to do different things, and some people really do see a particular need and just find themselves impelled to go and do it. That needs to be held again within the body of Christ. One of the lovely things, again, being a bishop is a real privilege because you get to see a range of different church families over a larger area than most Christians normally do. And as a result, you see how the different bits of the body of Christ are working. These people are campaigning for what to do about asylum seekers, and these people are campaigning about climate change, and so on and so forth. And they can all look like rather fussy little special interest groups if you only know that one. But if you can see the larger picture and hold it together, as some of the big organizations like Christian Aid try to do, then it is possible to rescue the thing from it collapsing into that little sort of fussy different groups. But in particular, we need to join the dots up and realize that social justice is not something other than the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. When God raised Jesus Christ from the dead, he launched his project of putting the world right. And part of the reason why some liberals don't believe in the resurrection is they just don't see that connection because nobody's ever even suggested it to them. They mightn't see it even if somebody did suggest it, but we could at least try. And likewise, there are many people who are passionate about this or that bit of social justice, but who regard the old-fashioned truths about Jesus' life and death and resurrection as, oh, that's all that churchy stuff. That just keeps people going around in little holy huddles, and we're going to do it differently. So we all need to be reminded that we have to join the whole picture up. And then you get the bigger view, because any work for social justice has to flow out of the worship of the risen and ascended Jesus. Because if it doesn't flow out of the worship of the crucified, risen, and ascended Jesus, it is us doing it in our own strength and our own way. And woe betide us. The danger then, of course, is people say, oh, well, then we better not even try. And that becomes an excuse. Yeah.
This goes out for our pastors in the audience. How would you advise pastors that have been modeled the progress framework of enlightenment to proceed forward in the changing to the Pauline framework?
Yeah, this is difficult because the Enlightenment's progress framework is all-embracing in Western cultures. I say, you hear it on the radio, in my country certainly, somebody just casually doing an interview with a politician or a moral teacher, saying, well, and this phrase, now that we live in the modern world, or how can you still say that in the 21st century? As though we were all signed up to the belief that things gradually went in a particular direction. This owes a lot to Kant and Hegel and these philosophers, but you don't need to understand all the philosophical tradition just to see that it's garbage, it's rubbish. You know, that dream of progress should have died in the 20th century, but it's so comfortable for us to go on believing it that we conveniently ignore all the blips that have happened, even 9/11, and even what's going on now. So we need to remind ourselves of the true narrative. A plug for a book, John Ortberg's book, Who is This Man? Some of you will know John, Menlo Park Presbyterian Church in San Francisco, and John's book, Who is This Man?, is about the actual story of the church and all the things in society that have radically changed down many, many centuries as a result of people following Jesus, in a way that then puts to rest the Enlightenment myth that Christianity is part of the problem and that it's the Enlightenment that's really got the solutions. We need to be more savvy about knowing that the church history was not simply about Constantine and the Crusades and the Inquisition. That's what people routinely talk about. No, that's not what it's about. It's about God's kingdom coming on earth as in heaven through people helping the poor, housing the homeless, feeding the hungry, doing medicine for all, doing education for all. These are things the church has done from the beginning. We need to honor that and know how to tell our own story with selected, juicy examples of which there are dozens. Only so can we then avoid slipping back into the way the world normally wants to portray it.
Our next question, would Professor Wright care to offer some suggestions or thoughts on introducing St. Paul to others, or specifically maybe non-Christians?
Introducing St. Paul to others, as in people who are not part of the Christian church. As a completely off-the-wall idea, I would love to see somebody with real musical talent in whatever genre doing a kind of Paul opera. I don't mean grand opera a la Verdi, although if that's your penchant, then that will be fun too. But I'd love to see some contemporary Christian musicians saying how, without trivializing, without dumbing down, how can we actually get inside Paul's vision and see how that might translate into today's idioms? I was actually in a little theatre in Fribourg in Switzerland last year where there was a play put on by some students, which was a very bizarre postmodern play, but it was sort of about St. Paul. And I applauded it. I thought, well, it was bizarre and it was very postmodern, but at least they were saying, here's somebody we need to wrestle with. And here's something, here are big ideas which maybe we need to hear again. And one of the extraordinary signs of our times is that several major secular European philosophers have turned to St. Paul in recent days because for many European philosophers, their dreams of social progress died with the collapse of communism, 1989. And even though they themselves recognized that the Marxism that was then available in the world was completely bankrupt and wasn't going anywhere, nevertheless, they still believed that there ought to be a better vision of society. And so people like Giorgio Agamben in Italy, people like Jacob Taubes in France, several other people, Slavoj Žižek, are writing about St. Paul in ways which make some of us Pauline theologians sort of rub our eyes and think, are we looking at the same text? But I think it's wonderful that when faced with the death of all the modern dreams about how to do human life, people are actually saying right now, maybe that funny old fellow Paul has got something. Of course, they always say, this doesn't mean we believe in God, and we certainly don't believe in the resurrection, but maybe Paul's still got something to teach us. And I think when you get into that conversation, you're on a winning streak, because then you can say, actually, yes, you're right, Paul does have an amazing vision of human community. Paul does see that there are radically different ways to be human, which are much better than the dehumanizing ways you've all been behaving. But actually, to get there, the route lies through this person, Jesus. And in going through this person, Jesus, it introduces you not to the God that you've just given up believing in, the silly old Epicurean gods, but to the real living God. So there are ways in, and I think it's that sense of what is the human project about? What are human communities there for? And realizing that Paul has a huge amount to say to that, and then again joining the dots. But music would help as well. Oh, 2 or 3. Oh, yeah, well, maybe 2.
Okay.
I've just seen what time it is. I have no idea. Time flies when one is enjoying oneself.
If it is a faithful creator putting the world right, where is it best to find hope of this really happening to bolster our faith?
Signs of what God is doing in the world are notoriously elusive, and I think necessarily so, because God is not at our beck and call. I remember wrestling with this issue with a dear beloved friend, a theologian, who with his wife had had a prayer ministry in which they had prayed for healing for many people who they had seen get healed through their and other people's prayers. And then their own daughter-in-law got sick with cancer in her 30s, and they prayed, and she died. And that was just like really hard, like a kick in the teeth. Having trusted God to see so many things, then when it was deeply personal for them, it didn't happen. Now, I suspect half the people in this room could tell stories like that. But what this does mean is that God does act, God does do things. They're always surprising. We can't produce them. It's not our power that does it. When we pray, God does stuff, not always what we want. God always answers prayer, even if it's maybe a no or a wait or a, well, not that way actually. And in the middle of that, And prayer is a funny thing, and answered prayer is a funny thing, because it doesn't work on a sort of sliding scale that if I pray once, it might happen. If I pray twice, it's very likely. If I pray 3 times, it really is. I remember once my spiritual director saying to me, when I was wrestling with some issue, I forget what it was, I said, how long do I have to go on praying about this? And he said, oh, it might be 10 years, might be 20 years, I don't know, I'm not God. And in my own experience, personally and working in ministry, etc., when you pray for things, sometimes it happens absolutely then and there, as though God's been waiting for you to ask, I want to give this to you, but I want you to know it's my gift and not just a coincidence. So please, one prayer will do it. And then other times, it really is day by day hard graft. And then quite suddenly, a year or 2 years or 5 years later, all sorts of things happen in a string. Bang, 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 bang. You think, where did all that come from? Oh, wait a minute, I have been praying about that for the last 5 years. And so it remains elusive, and I think necessarily so, because it isn't in our gift. But anyone that's worked with real churches for some time will know that there are huge frustrations, because churches consist of frail, fallible humans like you and me, but also those wonderful moments when actually something happens, a golden moment of either healing or new life or something. And again, in my ministry, I've been privileged to see several such new projects springing up. So the church in a really, really, really poor area of my diocese, one particular bit of one conurbation, a very unpleasant, dirty rust belt of an area, where most of the families were actually single mothers with children, because most of the men had gone off or been killed in fights or whatever. Horrible area. And so there were these single mothers who had to work if they could to earn money, but then that meant that their kids had nowhere to go all day, and there was no playgroup. So the church said, we haven't got the resources, but we will do something for these children. And it set up from scratch an amazing little project in that neighborhood. And these children were safe, and their mothers could come and pick them up when they came back from work or whatever. And it sent a sign out into the neighborhood that actually there is a different way to do stuff, and that we don't have to wait for the government to do it. The church is right there, even if we don't have many resources. Or another one. Sorry, I could talk about this stuff all night. There's one more. In another part of my diocese, there was a school that went up to the age of 16, that had the reputation of being the worst school in the country, not just in the diocese, in the country. And teachers were afraid to go in there. There were stand-up fights going on, all sorts of things happening. No learning was visibly taking place. It was just a terrible place. And it reflected a terrible community that it was in the middle of. And the local education authority came to us in the Church of England, because we do education, one of the things where we think we know how to do, and said, will you please partner with us in turning this school around? We said, okay, we're in for the long haul, we'll do it. And the church got together with some local agencies, and we changed the board of governors, we put in a new head teacher, we put in a new structure. Within 6 months, the place was unrecognizable. And I went in to do the formal opening a few months into the start of the new school year. And I remember saying to one 16-year-old, what's happened that's different here? And he didn't miss a beat. He said, well, sir, it's amazing. The teachers come to lessons on time now. And that sent a sign out into the whole dysfunctional community that there might be a different way of doing stuff. It's got the fingerprints of the gospel on it.
All right, I think this will be our last question. If you and C.S. Lewis, I like the opening of that one. If you and C.S. Lewis were to sit down and have a drink together, what subject would cause the most friction between you?
Great question. Great question. Great question. Quite possibly the choice of drink. If we got over that one, I would want to say that there's one of the screw tape letters which he just got totally wrong. Because in one of the screw tape letters, he has a good old go against historical Jesus scholarship. And he basically sees it as a trick of the devil. And I know what he was reacting against. He was reacting against Bultmann, he was reacting against Albert Schweitzer, he was reacting against reductionist lives of Jesus that pull Jesus down or make him, as he says in that letter, a crank vending a panacea. You know, this quirky Jesus. And then he says that actually Jesus was preaching a message of salvation from a sin which they already knew about. The irony is, Lewis was an amazing scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature, one of the greatest there's ever been. He knew those texts like the back of his... He knew that world. He breathed the air of that world. He lived in that world. And he knew that if you were going to read Milton or Spencer or anything from Beowulf right through to the 18th century, you needed to know what it was like to live in that world. It never occurred to him, it seems, that you need to do the same with the New Testament. So I think we would just find that a little difficult, at least for the first couple of drinks. Might get easy after that.
Well, on that note, join me again in thanking Professor Wright.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bless you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.